So do we call you Tucker now?
Not yet.
Not yet. Okay.
I'm so close.
I don't know who's in here already, but hello. We're gonna get started in about 10 minutes. Thanks. The lighting is not great for those people, but no. One more thing, if you won't be able to see the slides very clearly, but in the description of this stream, there's a link to a Google Drive version of the slides so you can follow along. And I'll try to remember to say when I'm switching slides so you can keep up.
I don't even know if there's anyone in here. So.
It usually says like a number.
My sister's bringing some.
She brings some?
Yes. There she is with my plates and cups.
Here's my friend Cup and Thomas. How are you? You too. Oh, is this strategic?
Is it what?
Strategic?
Yes. Sarah's babysitting the live stream.
Oh, okay.
You can sit wherever you like.
Okay.
How are you?
Really good to see you. Oh, I'm so sorry I poked you in the ear. You're good. You're golden. Get some water. Lisa to hug.
Lord Bell also texted me.
Oh,
Very nice.
Yeah. Find you so good.
That will be how it is.
You're beautiful. Thank you. I've seen this look and I love it.
Oh, yellow, I know.
I know.
Yeah, Sky Kristen. Oh, Kristen. Now here's my committee.
We passed you.
It's fine. Oh, we're all here.
I need more.
I mean, if they're cool, I mean. I like every message that went out said this correct information. This right? Yes, I think so.
There was that one with the wrong time.
But she corrected it.
Earlier time and she corrected it. Yeah.
Signa?
Yeah, okay, if you want to do that too soon.
Use a makeup is really useful.
Oh, you're not
I failed.
It's good, it's already. Mary-Caitlyn,
Yes?
this is my student Anastasia.
Hi, nice to meet you. Thank you so much for coming. I'm very excited. I will my welcome. Okay.
Yeah, there's some stuff.
What's that? There's a little elderflower lemon seltzer thing. Would you like that?
Yes, he really wants it.
Or you? It's more soda than seltzer. That was intentional.
Did you want to grab you a signature? You want me to send her?
Are you gonna be able to?
Yes. She's fine? Okay.
I'm just gonna try to look over here too so I can talk to my lights.
Okay.
What am I surrounded for the end of the summer? I just wish my hair had been show.
Here we go.
Hi! Hello!
Yeah.
What is that?
It's the one about.
Okay.
Yes. And then on one is the.
There's what? Not here yet.
She's doing great.
Okay.
You want some cookies or anything? Yeah.
It's child-proof.
At this point, it's just because it's a game, you know?
My friend would send me.
Is that you setting it up?
Yeah, that's.
Is it currently going?
Yeah,
Can we hear everything you say?
I don't know how good the. I don't know how good. I don't know.
Yeah.
We'll see.
Yeah.
Hopefully they can hear something.
I think the main point is that you're great. Grace is saying you're champion.
I hope so. We're gonna have a full house. I'm so honored. Wow. One more family member.
Hey, how are you? How's everything? You go.
Wow.
Yeah.
Can you make sure?
Hi, how are you doing? Good. See you.
Hello. Thanks for being here. I know it's kind of your job, but if you don't, right here is right in front of my live stream. So
Oh,
just,
yes.
you can probably sit here, but not over that.
I'm
Wait, I want to see this slide
Yeah,
better.
you maybe.
I will sit here.
I didn't expect to have such a good crowd in August.
So you're so good at advertising.
I am. I think the live stream is pretty poppin'. Let me see. We have 7 people.
Wow. If you were anyone else, I'd been like, it's 105. I'll just live stream it, even though I'm in town.
We can't. The room's reserved for several hours, so.
Yeah.
We can move to the lab.
Is it anonymous? Like you?
Probably.
You can see. Yeah. Ex-boyfriends.
Sounds good.
Oh, yeah. Do Rilo.
Oh, Shane? I started learning tomorrow, so yeah, later. Definitely from home, Skype, and I didn't get one of my stops, but thank you for sending me that comments, but I was like, got me to use it. What are you doing? That's right.
Heidi, Elise Bell says hi. She's like in live stream.
Oh, I wish I could love but there's just no way, you know, so this is already pulled back, but if you wanna do like a phone call or a Skype chat or something while I'm on the way. Okay, that's also fine, just so you know, if you want, looking for me around. I know, I mean, yeah, my sister's right over here. And we've got, I mean, we're not sitting racing, we've got some stops, I mean, I was gonna invite some people to have a drink later tonight, but I have that.
I've never seen it. Do you fly out of here?
Right, the time is not, that time's wrong, yeah, don't look at that clock.
Oh, Elise said it's perfect. You can do everything.
Good. She, after I said hello to the live stream, she went, oh, really great. Wow, yes. No, I mean, yes, that's right. I also
center as you do.
So are we?
Well, Shane suggested that. I don't have a response. I did not. You can put a lot all the time. I mean, and it's just. Yeah, that makes sense. You want
Someone texting me, child texting me that she can hear me, so no secrets. Right next to the lecture.
I'm gonna start selling some spoilers.
Spoilers, she passes.
There's 11 viewers, it's fantastic.
How many?
11.
Is Sam on the screen?
I don't know, I didn't check, but you better be, otherwise.
I wonder who was practicing for him.
Yes, he is on screen. And so it's
Oh, I just, first tweet I see is a Meg Martina, I thought it was you.
And she's watching my live stream?
If she started watching her live stream, like I just wouldn't even do it. I would be like, that's it. I peaked. Done.
Yay! Right behind us. Hey! Right here.
Yes.
So yeah, I've done you should represent those bad teachers. Maybe.
All right. Was it 10? The first email they sent out. No, you're fine.
Oh,
you're good. All right.
Okay, welcome to the public section of Mary-Caitlyn Valentinson's dissertation defense. So Mary-Caitlyn came to the joint PhD program in anthropology and linguistics in 2012 with a BA from CUNY and Hunter College. During her graduate career here, she received the Graduate and Professional Students Council Outstanding Graduate Student Leadership Award. And she also served as co-president of Leader Circle. And she's also the assistant editor for the linguistic anthropology section for the Arizona Anthropologist. She is also a member on the committee on the status of women in linguistics for the Linguistic Society of America. And she has published a single authored paper in Language and Society and a co-authored paper in the Journal of Sociolinguistics. And after her dissertation defense, tomorrow she'll be trying out to Appalachian State University. So she will be a visiting professor in the Department of Anthropology at Appalachian State University.
So you have to pass
Today, she will present her dissertation entitled Language Use and Global Media Circulation Among Argentine Fans of English Mass Media. Her dissertation research was funded by the Louise Foucault Marshall Foundation Dissertation Fellowship, University of Arizona Social and Behavioral Sciences Research Institute Dissertation Grant, and Tinker Foundation Field Research Grant.
such a nice introduction. Thank you, Jane. Welcome everyone to my defense. I am really thrilled and happy to have such a huge crowd at the end of the summer. This is amazing. And in the spirit of all these thank yous, I wanted to begin with some acknowledgments, some that Ching already mentioned, the people who funded my research and my writing, and all of the people, very abbreviated list of people who supported me during this process. And I also want to say welcome and thank you to the people on the live stream. Hello. Comments are disabled because I don't want you to distract me. And no veo si hay argentinos ahí en el live stream, si hay saludos, gracias por estar desde tan lejos. Si hay integrantes en este estudio allá en el live stream, bienvenidos, muchas gracias por todos. La presentación va a ser 100% en inglés, lamentablemente, pero cualquier pregunta o duda me lo piden después. Okay, so now let's get to business. There are three major themes of this dissertation that I see as kind of interlocking, moving from broader to narrower. On the biggest macro level, it deals with questions of global cultural flows, which is a term the anthropologist Arjun Appadurai developed to talk about the circulation and spread of ideas, commodities, science, so on, within the context of globalization. And also the way that these different flows cause such products or objects or ideas to be taken up and interpreted in new ways in different local contexts. The middle, kind of more intermediate theme of this dissertation is the role of media and pop culture in people's everyday lives. What is it useful for? What do we think it means? Why and how do people relate to it? And so on. And finally, there's an investigation of some more micro-level instantiations of language use, especially the idea of stance-taking, which refers to positioning oneself or positioning others with respect to other social actors or cultural objects, and also intertextuality, which I'll discuss more later. But roughly, it's this idea of interconnections between texts. And when I say texts here, I don't mean like written orthographic texts. I mean any kind of cultural product that can be read in some sort of symbolic or metaphorical way. What I hope this dissertation shows is some of the interlinkages between these three levels, how they're all related to each other, and how the relationship between these three levels is a useful way for us to understand how these big global cultural flows work in the kind of mediatized, super digitally connected world that we live in. First, I want to address why I went to Argentina to do this work. Despite the kind of mainstream and also accurate perception that Argentina is a Spanish-speaking country, Great Britain was actually a really major cultural, political, and economic influence in the country from the time it gained its independence from Spain in 1816 up through the middle of the 20th century. And this presence of Great Britain in Argentina led to ideas that English was the language of the super wealthy, the super elite. And you can see little bits of influence of that in the linguistic landscape of Argentina today, like the names of the richest sports teams are in English, and the names of all the like shishi social clubs, like boating clubs and horseback riding clubs, those are all in English, right? And for many people, these historical associations are still quite present in their everyday lives, particularly given the more, it's several decades past at this point, but the more recent conflict between Britain and Argentina about the Islas Malvinas, or the Falkland Islands, as they're sometimes called in English. So these historical discourses are now living together with more contemporary discourses of English as English as the global language. These discourses don't only exist in Argentina, of course, we see them all over the world. But it's these ideas that English is a useful tool for class mobility, right? Not just the super elite. That it's a sign of education and maybe indexes a kind of cosmopolitan sort of worldview. Now these two discourses aren't opposites exactly, but they are kind of contrastive in how they show orientations to things like class and worldview. And these contrasts are really highlighted during processes of global media flows, when these flows bring English language media texts and pop culture into Argentina for popular consumption. And that brings me to the next sort of entree question for this research: why fans? Just to be clear, when I talk about fans here, I don't mean the casual viewer who enjoys some kind of cultural product, excuse me. Yes, if you watched every single episode of Game of Thrones for the last 8 years and were really upset with how it ended, you can call yourself a fan of Game of Thrones. But here what I mean are the folks for whom their fandom, but I'm talking about the kind of like hyper engaged, my whole life is about this. It's a central part of how I see my identity, how I organize myself socially. I'm talking about the folks who go to conventions with handmade dolls and toys and products and try to just evangelize, convince people to watch their show. I'm talking about people who dress up in extremely elaborate costume, cosplay, and perform at conventions in the role of their favorite characters. So it's a much more intense version of being a fan than just being a casual viewer or enjoyer. There's a very rich body of literature, mostly coming from media studies, that looks at fans and fandom as cultural practice. And in my dissertation, I try to show how they're also a really useful population, if you will, for understanding how global media flows and how media that's produced in one cultural linguistic context gets changed and reinterpreted when it's taken up in another. And the reason they're so useful for looking at these kinds of processes is because their consumption is so hyper-visible in the way they construct their identities and communities. Another thing that the fan studies literature tells us is that the way fans, this kind of fan, engages with media text is transformational, meaning they're fans by virtue of the fact that they're not just engaging with a media text on a surface level, they are always trying to reinterpret it, change it, play with it, transform it in some way. So Argentine fans of English language, media, and pop culture, and here in this study I've got anything from fans of British franchises like the sci-fi show Doctor Who or Harry Potter, to American products like Star Wars or the television show Supernatural. These people offer a really clear site for understanding how processes of global media flows intersect with language ideologies, right? Because you've got these global English language texts coming into Argentina, and during uptake and transformation and recirculation of these texts, they're also confronting these two kind of contrasting discourses of what English means in Argentina. My interest in studying fans and fandom also led to certain methodological considerations, and I won't talk too much about methods here because on a certain level it's a lot of hanging out with people and talking to people, and most of you know what that looks like. But the methods I used here are related to another characteristic that's fundamental of contemporary fandom that the fan studies literature tells us about, which is the fact that most of the fan, like social organization and fan practices these days happen online in digital communities. And I can say a lot more about how that developed historically in media fandom, but basically this means if you want to study fans, you have to go online. So this meant that I spent 18 months doing online fieldwork, joining Argentine fan Facebook groups, following and chatting with Argentine fans on other social media platforms, lots of screenshotting of memes, online surveys, and contiguous with the last 4 months of this, I also did 4 months of in-person fieldwork in Buenos Aires, where I was at a fan convention or a club meetup every other weekend, doing various sorts of data collection. The research questions that guided this dissertation are a bit dense, so instead of unpacking them all here, I've just highlighted in green some of the kind of critical phrases and terms in each. Roughly, these questions are asking how global Anglophone media texts are taken up by Argentine audiences and transformed from them, and then what new social significance English acquires in that process. What specific linguistic and semiotic elements become relevant for Argentine fans as they take up and transform these media texts, and how identification as a fan lets these Argentine fans kind of reframe or reposition their role as consumers within these global media flows. In the rest of this presentation, I will be discussing a few bits of data from each of the 3 major analytical chapters of my dissertation. In the actual dissertation, I cover everything from the issues of stance and code choice that you'll see here to analyses of discourse markers, but I don't want to be here for hours, so I'm just going to focus on a subset of that work here. And with that, let us turn to some of the things I found. First, I want to talk about how people take stances and position themselves with respect to the kind of English that comes in through media flows, and how that source of English puts fans in contrast with some of those historical discourses of English elitism in Argentina. So Argentine fans, especially the ones that I spoke to in the course of this research, develop a really impressive level of fluency in English through their engagement with fandom and pop culture. Even though English language education is nominally mandated by the state, a lot of it depends on how wealthy the school you go to is and so on. It's roughly similar to the state of foreign language education in the US. So even though most of my participants did have exposure to English through more kind of formal educational environments, all of them were really confident that I would not have this level of fluency or proficiency unless I was writing fan fiction all the time in English, watching the same film over and over and over again so I could learn to listen to it more or less without relying too much on the subtitles, and so on. My assessment of their fluency is obviously kind of impressionistic based on listening to them speak and write to each other. I didn't assess that in any formal way, but they're impressively fluent in English. Large swaths of their social networks are English dominant because they're talking to a lot of English-speaking fans from other parts of the world, right? And in spoken conversation, in everyday speech in Argentina, sometimes that means that lexical items from English show up, especially related to domains of fandom and social media. So you'll hear words like shipping, which means the wanting two characters to be in a romantic relationship together. Spoiler, we all know what that means. Shit posting, which means making a lot of nonsensical, humorous posts on social media. So these words, since they don't have a widely used Spanish equivalent, they'll draw into English for that. And when they talk about their own linguistic practice, these fans will often call the way they speak Spanglish, or we mix both languages a lot. And that assessment is often delivered with this kind of humorous, like slightly mocking tone, like it's kind of bad, but that's just how we do it. And they do that in order to contrast this kind of use of English with perceptions of English use for another kind of salient social character, social type in Argentina, which is the cheto. Cheto basically refers to a snobby, stuck-up rich kid. The rich part is important. And one of their primary characteristics is peppering their speech with English words, especially ones that already have really straightforward Spanish equivalents. So this is a screenshot from a parodic humor YouTube video, Como ser cheto, how to be a cheto. And the guy pretending to be a cheto is, I paused it right at the scene where he's saying what a lot of times rather than que, right? And this idea that there's this excessive overuse of English by this sort of character is tied to these historical discourses linking English to the elite, the super wealthy, and it's pretty widely considered annoying and obnoxious that they do this all the time. It's not cool for these folks to use English in this way. It also tells us why some fans are a bit kind of apologetic or not so sure about their use of Spanglish or how much English they use in their everyday speech, because doing so could get you clocked as a cheto, and that's not desirable. No one wants to be called a snotty, stuck-up rich kid. I'm going to play a few seconds of a clip that highlights both how salient this link is between English use and chetos, and then a really interesting example of one of my participants drawing on more North American, US-based language ideologies to describe this practice. There's no room up here for a transcript, but it's just short, so I'm going to play a bit, explain what's going on, and then play a bit more. The first thing that you're going to hear is me asking them, tell me about which social groups use a lot of English here, if there are any, and I want you to listen to first how quickly they know how to answer that question. Que son los más uso de inglés.
Clase alta, sí.
Chetos. It's right after I finish asking the question. It's chetos. It's clase alta. It's upper class. So that shows how strong and salient that link is for them. In the next little bit, I'm going to play. There's a few seconds of them kind of. I asked them I think I know what that word means, but tell me a little bit more. And they're saying, yeah, upper class, maybe upper middle class. And then one of the participants And Medio draws this really interesting comparison to that stuck-up rich character is to make this explanation intelligible to me, an American. That makes sense. But it also illustrates how language ideologies that are circulating into Argentina through mass media and popular culture are being picked up and used by Argentine fans to do some of this stance-taking work, to position themselves and others. And just in case it's not clear, these fans are trying to say, we're not chetos. That's not why we use English. Now, these are ideologies of speech, but there's also a lot of social stance-taking and positioning work that fans do with respect to the form of linguistic mediation they use to consume English language media. And by that I mean ideologies of dubbing or subtitling. Do they watch shows or films or so on with subs or dubs? Who's allowed to watch dubs versus subs and why? Just in case you don't know, dubbing refers to the cases where voice actors will record and overlay a vocal track, usually in a different language, on top of the film recording, so you get a different voice than the actor who's performing that role visually, and that's usually to make these texts more accessible to different linguistic audiences. So, according to the fans in my study, it's not acceptable to watch dubs if you are a serious hardcore fan. It is basically only acceptable for certain segments of the population, namely the poor/uneducated, people at the lifespan margins, the elderly, young people. This is really interesting. I had a participant tell me that there is a federal law that requires public cable TV channels to air dubbed versions of any foreign language media that they show. And her assessment about why that was to help integrate people from the lower classes who can't read the subtitles at the same time as they watch TVs or movies. And I heard several different versions of this, right? So this idea that poor people or uneducated people are watching dubs is pretty salient here. And this idea of age, they're really young or they're really old, is relevant in this excerpt, first of all, where this participant makes a really, I think, interesting rhetorical parallelism between when she used to watch dubs and now when she prefers the English-speaking subtitled media. So she says, desde que tengo uso de memoria, and this is an overly literal translation, but like since I can remember back when I was a kid, back then I watched series and movies and TVs dubbed into Spanish. Pero desde que tengo uso de razón, again, overly literal, but since I have use of reason, since I've grown up and know a little bit better, that's when I've started to be more exposed to the English-speaking part of media and pop culture. So when you're young and don't really know any better, it's fine. When you're older and have use of reason, not fine. And then over here is a bit from a really long Facebook comment on a really long Facebook thread in one of the Doctor Who fan groups I participated in, where they were debating whether subtitling or dubbing was good. And at the end of this person's story, they say, just for my dad or grandma, yeah, they can read subtitles, but it's more comfortable for them. They're older, at the end of a long week. It's more comfortable for them to see what's happening rather than listening to it. So dubbing is a licensed and acceptable form of linguistic mediation for the set group or set of characteristics that most of the fans in my study kind of want to position themselves away from. But it would be kind of rude to say, well, poor dumb people watch subs and I neither, so I'm not going to do that. So instead, when the fans in my study describe why subtitling is the better form to consume this media in, they've really drawn this idea of original or authentic voices of the performers. And there's this sense that you want to be able to hear those original, authentic voices no matter what. Even if the quality of the subs are inferior to a dub, it's still better to watch subtitles. So that's what this meme on the right is showing you. It's so tiring to explain the humor in a meme, but so this is a screenshot of a Star Wars movie. The character, this little boy running through the desert, grows up to be Darth Vader, the big bad guy, in a later film. This subtitle, just like tu padre, is that really iconic Star Wars line, Luke, I am your father, which occurs in a different film in the franchise. This image and this subtitle They're not in the same films. They wouldn't go together. But the joke part of the meme, which is up here, says, you know, the subtitle's a little bit out of sync, but whatever, I'm just gonna watch it like this. Telling you that, this level of mismatch, again, would never happen unless you loaded the wrong subtitle file. But sometimes if you've got subtitle files that were fan-made, for example, you might get these sort of mismatch cases, desynchronization cases, and if you're a hardcore fan, you put up with it because it's really important to hear the original, authentic voices of the actors. And I skipped over what I wanted to say about this meeting, but it's really funny. So this is playing on these ideas about how not having the original or authentic voices can be really disruptive. What this meme says is, when I watch a film with dubbing by Mario Castañeda. Mario Castañeda is a really famous voice actor in Latin America. He does a lot of voice acting work, so you hear his voice in a lot of big franchisee media products. And he's got on top of all of these characters, all of these actors, this hairstyle that's belongs to the character Goku from Dragon Ball Z, which is an anime. Mario Castañeda did the voice acting for Goku. So now when this meme author sees a film with Bruce Willis, you're watching Die Hard, you're hearing Goku's voice. That's annoying. You're watching a Jim Carrey film, you're hearing Goku's voice instead of Jim Carrey. And that's really disruptive. Fans would rather not do that. So these two sets of data, these cases where they're contrasting themselves with Chetos, comparing Chetos to the LA accent, and creating all these categories for who prefers dubs and who prefers subtitles are illustrations of some of the stance-taking moves these fans take towards English, especially forms of English that circulate into Argentina through media and pop culture. And they also illustrate some of the new stuff about some new social meanings that English is acquiring in Argentina. First of all, this idea that, did somebody say something? No, sorry. First of all, this idea that having a really proficient level of English is cool. It's good to be able to watch shows and films only relying on subs rather than dubs. That's an index of being a really hardcore, serious fan, and probably also of being educated and having a certain cosmopolitan worldview. I didn't show some of this data, but there's also a lot of folks saying like, well, you know, I studied English for a little while, so that's kind of why I know better, that subs are better than dubs. On the other hand, open oral display of too much English can link you to this Cheto figure, and that's especially undesirable given these historical ideologies of English in Argentina. Again, there's another piece of data that I'm not showing here where I'm texting with the two guys you heard in that clip who were saying like, it might be fine if someone was looking over your shoulder on the subway and saw you texting in English, but if they heard the two of us walking around talking about fandom or talking about fan fiction, they would think, ugh, chetos, how annoying. So there's also questions of modality and quantity of English that these fans have to be careful with. Now I'd like to turn to some other issues of stance taking, this time on digital fan spaces, on social media. And we'll start with Tumblr because that's where this project started until I learned that way more Argentine fans are on Facebook groups than on Tumblr. The reason is because much of the fan studies literature tells us that Tumblr right now is the kind of social media platform for fandom on the internet. Again, this hasn't always been the case. I can tell you more about that history later, but if you want to study fans, you go online, and if you want to be online studying fans, you should probably start at Tumblr. Tumblr is a platform that's very kind of individualistic. You have your blog, you can follow other blogs, and they can follow you back, but there's no other higher level, like, hierarchical structure to say these are the blogs by Argentinians or these are the blogs of Harry Potter fans. There are ways to find those people, which I will tell you next. There's also a really strong perception, at least among my fans, of English as a very English dominant and also very like North American, USA dominant space. This used to be true for the rest of the internet, but I think that's sort of changing. So for these Argentine fans who want to connect with other people who consume and enjoy English language, often North American media, that's good. But there are a lot of these users who do also want to make clear that as Argentinians, as Spanish speakers, they might have a different take on different ways of interpreting these texts, right? So they want to be able to find each other. One way that such folks deal with this is by kind of manipulating one of Tumblr's key communicative affordances, meaning things that the platform can be made to do. And that's by using the tagging system. Tumblr tags are visually similar to hashtags on other social media sites. You have the pound sign and some text afterwards. And what those tags on a post do is create links to every other post on the site that has the same tag. So if you write a post on Tumblr about how great my defense was and you tag it linguistics, anthropology, that post would show up in a stream of all the other posts tagged linguistics or anthropology. There's a Tumblr researcher called Borlai there's a lot of ways of using Tumblr tags. The way that's most in line with how Tumblr designed the tags to be used are these keyword tags, which are labels that help you find certain posts better. Clicking on the anthropology tag and finding all the posts about anthropology. And in my work, I found a kind of subset of these sorts of tags, which I call metalinguistic keyword tags, because they work to describe or label the linguistic form or content of a post. They're doing this sort of highlighting work. So other Argentine fans on Tumblr can see who the other folks are. And I'll show some examples here. It's impossible to see them in the screenshot, so I've zoomed it in over here. This is a kind of interesting case because the text of the post is actually in English, but these tags are referring to the video clip, which I will talk more about those videos towards the end. It's tagged RG, which is a not very nice way of saying Argentinian, Latine, Español, Spanish. Cluing other people in that this post is going to be one that's relevant to other Argentinians, other Latin Americans, maybe other people who speak Spanish. And the person who made this post was kind of explaining to me what the rationale was here. And they draw very strongly on these ideas of community building, creating a space where people feel like home, because you could just get exhausted and tired of reading English all the time. It gets to a point where your brain is just tired. So really drawing on these ideas of community and sort of safe space creation. Facebook is a bit different, but really important because early in my preliminary field work, I learned that there are actually it was a lot easier to find Argentine fans on Facebook than it was on Tumblr. And part of the reason is that, even though Facebook doesn't let you plug into that sort of global mainstream sense of like, this is where all the fans are, which is Tumblr, Facebook has this property called groups where you can self-select into a group called Star Trek fans of Argentina or Gryffindors in Argentina. So you know that the people you're talking about with Harry Potter are likely to be other Argentinians. So obviously in these groups, Spanish is kind of the presumed primary language. But since they're still making these groups to connect with fans and talk about English language media, there does have to be some work done to get English into the group in a licensed, acceptable way. So here are two screenshots that show some examples of this. On the left, you see someone has posted some images. The post here is images and captions in English of what these two actors are saying. These are the lead actors from the show Supernatural. They're at a convention in the US and they've given an interview. And so we've got screen caps of them giving the interview and English sort of captions saying what they said. And right after this post was made, the comment says, it says comments and approximate translations, I'll put them on later or tomorrow. I just posted this quickly, kisses to all. So this commenter is saying, functionally saying sort of like, hold your horses, I'll get the translations up as soon as possible, because she knows that if she doesn't make some kind of explanation for why there's no translations there, she could get sanctioned, like the person who makes this post on the right. This is a post from one of the Doctor Who Facebook groups I participated in. The original post is about some fan theory about one of the episodes, something about the Doctor Who universe. And the comment opens with, why are the fucking theories always in English? Sad face, I don't like it. Never mind the fact that the rest of the comment goes on to show that they were able to read and parse and engage with the text of the theory in a pretty substantial way. So rather than a critique of it being like, of this commenter not being able to understand what's going on in the theory, it's lamenting the fact that they have not been able to maintain a kind of consistent Spanish-only linguistic ethic in the group that makes all of this fan material maximally accessible for everyone in there. These sets of data from Tumblr and Facebook highlight how important co-choice is on fandom social media platforms and groups. Even in these spaces where English-based fan talk is really licensed, the stances people take towards English and managing English are quite complex. And it's not always true that it's good to be all in English all the time. How folks manage these sorts of stance-taking negotiations depends in part on the affordances of the platform and what assumptions they're making about the audience on the platform. The last two sets of data I want to talk about illustrate how fans use intertextuality and intertextual media references to construct versions of these globally circulating media franchises that are more Argentinian and more local. First, I want to talk about this phenomenal meme group on Facebook that I'm calling, that's the name of the spaceship in Doctor Who, Doblaje Argento. So what this group does is they produce, doblaje is dubbing, these aren't quite dubs because it's not an audio track, they're more like subtitles, but never mind. They produce very stylized Argentine subtitles on top of screenshots from Doctor Who scenes, right? So I believe in this original scene, I know Elise on the live stream actually knows exactly what went on this stream. I'm gonna guess. I don't remember the scene exactly, but this character, this male character is like asking this female character on the date. She says something like, yeah, sure, that'd be great. And then he adds some detail about the date that makes her make this really happy, excited face. In the Argentine dubbing, he first invites her, he first says, a lo mejor querías ir a Uji's a tomar una birra. Uji's is a very famous Argentine pizza restaurant. You probably won't know what that is unless you know something about pizza restaurants in Buenos Aires. The woman replies al toque, which is a very kind of slangy Argentine way of saying, yeah, right away, let's do it. And then in this last panel, he says, podemos pasar por un telo, we could go by a motel, y te bate una dolca. This line is really complicated. Literally it means I'll stir you up a dolca. Dolca is a Nescafe instant coffee product, and in the mid-2010s, there was a commercial in Argentina advertising this product. The commercial has like friends and colleagues, everybody stirring each other up a dolca. And there's one scene in the commercial where a man and a woman are walking home after a date, and they stop in front of the man's apartment, and he says, why don't you come upstairs and I can stir you up a dolca? So that phrase and this little gesture got picked up as like a sexual innuendo in Argentina, and that's what this group is playing on in this meme. Absolutely uninterpretable if you don't have a sense of what commercials were on popular TV in Argentina in the mid-2010s. I'll show another example. There's so many good examples. I wish I could do the whole presentation about this group, but here's another really interesting example because it overlays some Argentine language ideologies on top of British language ideologies. So this is a really iconic, really famous scene from Doctor Who. You've got this character, Rose, who's from London, and this character, the Doctor, functionally an alien, right, not from planet Earth, but he's played by Christopher Eccleston, who's from Manchester, England, and does this role in a Manchester accent. And in this very famous scene, Rose, the Londoner, asks the Doctor, an alien, if you're an alien, why do you sound like you're from the North? And the Doctor replies, lots of planets have a North. So there's a lots of work that has unpacked the British language ideology parts of that. Here, this group is playing on it by having this character say, si sos un marciano, if you're an alien, if you're a Martian, ¿por qué hablas como jujeño? Why do you talk like someone from Jujuy, from the northwestern part of the country? And then folks in the comments are continuing to play on that script. This one is awesome. Lots of planets have a Jujuy, with that little question mark. That means I kind of said something silly here. So The point is, what they've done here is not to make doblaje or subtitles in order to be more intelligible for an Argentine audience. Because the people enjoying and laughing at these memes, again, have relatively high enough English proficiency to enjoy and watch Doctor Who without these super niche Argentine reinterpretations. Instead, it's to make this massively popular, globally circulating media text unintelligible to a more mainstream audience. And then for one more fun set of data that shows some of this intertextuality stuff at work, I want to talk about this YouTube channel, Pero Resumo Así No Más, which roughly means, I'll just sum it up for you like this. It's a channel created by an Argentine actor, Jorge Pinarello. When I started working on this part of the chapter, it had 2 million plus YouTube subscribers, but he's over 3 million now. And there's a Facebook group for fans of the channel. At the time, it had about 70,000 members. Right now, the group is frozen for spam reasons, not relevant to this project. But anyway, you can see this is a screenshot of the main page of YouTube. You can see he's creating, he creates these parodic, like humorous summaries of big franchising media texts. Are you nodding because you know this channel, Elizabeth? Do you know it?
Not well enough to see.
Oh, but you know it's funny. You know it's hilarious. So he does Dexter, which is an American TV show, Walking Dead, American TV show. You see his live streams of Stranger Things, which is a popular Netflix show, Toy Story 4, and so on. And in this Facebook group, the Facebook group is it's not just Argentinians who join this Facebook group. It's not just Argentinians who watch the YouTube channel, 3 million plus subscribers. So this channel has a bit of a wider reach than just fans in Argentina. In this Facebook group, I spoke to a few folks, an Uruguayan and a Chilean, who were telling me that part of the humor was in the super exaggerated Argentine accent that Pinarello does in his narration, and how he creates subtitles for the characters in these summaries using features of Argentine Spanish. So you've got the voceo pronoun. Edward from Twilight I think Edward says this line. I don't know enough about Twilight. Vos me rompiste el auto. You, instead of tú me rompiste el auto. Querés, the corresponding verbal conjugation for that pronoun. Not that only Argentina has voceo, but in this case, it's pretty iconic of Argentina. And the lighting is not great for you guys to see this text. I apologize. But also also drawing on slang that's very markedly Argentinian to reinterpret some of the textual parts of these media franchises. So this is a screenshot from the summary of one of the Star Wars films. And if you've seen Star Wars, you know at the beginning they do that. There's a name for it that I've forgotten, but they do that scrolling Star Wars text, right? At the beginning, it opens with this kind of teal text on a black background that says a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. If he were doing a more mainstreamy Spanish translation, he might say something like, hace muchos años en una galaxia muy, muy lejos. Instead, he says, hace bocha de años y en la loma del orto, which means something like a hell long time ago and in the ass crack of nowhere. So this is one kind of localizing strategy that Pinarello uses to transform these massive global media franchises into something that sounds more Argentinian, more local. And similarly to the Doctor Who group, he also intercuts his summaries with clips from very Argentine media texts, niche Argentine media texts. So in the summary for the Kingsman film franchise, there's a bit where he's describing, I think, like the villain of the movie is trying to like drug or poison everyone in the world. And he intercuts this clip from a 1998 anti-drug commercial where these characters go, drogas para qué? Why drugs? So that's intercut in. A lot of his videos end with this mediatized phrase from an early 90s program on the Argentine channel Telefe, where this woman, she's kind of in a very sharp tuxedo and has one of those massive early 90s cell phones. She says, besito, besito, ciao, ciao, which anyone could understand. But if you're Argentinian, you know, like, well, I haven't watched that show since I was 5 years old. How funny. So both of these spaces for fan transformations of these massive Anglophone media texts essentially is allowing them to create versions of the text that, even if just in a humorous kind of silly way, are more reflective of their everyday lives, more just for them. one further step you could take this interpretation would be to argue that it allows them to kind of position or frame themselves as more agentive media creators within these processes of global media flows rather than just passive consumers. So to wrap up, I will return to these concentric circles of global flows, media, pop culture, and language use. Roughly, this work is showing us that these global cultural flows are bringing Anglophone media texts to Argentine audiences. Argentine fans are using these texts as a resource for doing lots of social work, contrasting themselves with local social types, positioning themselves in new ways within global mediascapes, and they're doing this work through strategies like stance taking and intertextuality. So that's all. I hope you have some questions for me. Elizabeth.
I know it's slightly tangential, but because there's no Cheto tie to Japanese anime manga.
What's the deal with Japanese media in Argentina?
Yeah, does it have, yeah.
Good question. I will answer that in the book in 5 years. I can say a little bit about it briefly. The little bit I can say is that a few times I was brought with some of my local contacts to anime-centric conventions. A lot of the comments my colleagues were telling me was, isn't it interesting how the profile here is a little bit more working class? Haven't unpacked that yet. Don't know what it means. Will follow up in the book. And then of course, like K-pop is getting really huge there too. And you see, I mean, at these fan conventions, there's the Supernatural fan table and the Doctor Who fan table next to tables for anime fans and K-pop fans. But it does seem like the uptake of that media is different. I don't know, but I love that you asked that question, and I hope to be able to answer it soon. Thank you. Yeah, Maya.
I have a question about this sort of ideology of wanting to hear the original authentic voice of the performer in this whole dubbing versus subtitling debate. I'm wondering, there's like the kinds of fandoms like Supernatural, for example, right, that are written for TV, and a lot of the fandom engages not just with the characters, but the actors themselves. But then there's things like Harry Potter that was originally books and then into movies, and I feel like maybe fans engage a lot more with the characters, well, depending on what kinds of fans, like the book or movie fans, right? Whatever. So I'm wondering if in the kinds of fandoms where the fandom was written for TV or for movie straight through, there's more of this insistence on the authentic voice or original voice than there is for
text, for books. Yeah, I think that's probably true. I think another thing that complicates, that's probably true. One thing that makes it complicated to say for sure is that for my fans who are roughly like millennial, our age, when they grew up reading Harry Potter, the books, it was like really difficult to get the English language texts right in Argentina. And they were kids, so they were probably more interested in reading it in their own language. There's also, I was studying abroad in Argentina when the 7th book came out, and I had a really rough time getting my dad to internationally FedEx me the last book in English. But I had a colleague in my class who was like a really great English reader, and the second I finished it, he was like, please, I can't deal with reading. I want to read it in English. So that's one data point from, so over 10 years ago. But there's probably something to that. Yeah, that would be worth picking apart more. Thank you. Yes, Amy.
So I'm also interested in sub versus dub. Because I think that there's a similar snootiness associated with subs versus dubs. So as a US person, of course I prefer subtitled films because I have access to reason.
Yes.
The voice of the original actor, and I think there's some kind of aesthetic snootiness, but there's also something about literacy versus morality, which ties into class.
Yes.
And I wonder if he found maybe a different spin on that or a similar spin on that, if that's playing a part.
Wait, I just sort of lost the thread of the question. Are you asking if those kinds of orientations are similar in other places?
In your Argentinian fans, is there also social status just associated with literacy?
Oh, yeah, definitely. Yeah. There's some, in some of these dubbing versus subtitling conversations I have, there's one piece of data that's totally escaping my mind right now. So I mentioned briefly that a lot of people will say, like, I've studied English and I know enough English to sort of say, like, I know when puns aren't being translated in a way that makes sense in the dub, which they never, it's not like they're necessarily translated more clearly in the subs, but something about trying to hear a pun in a dub doesn't say well with these folks. But since you raised, this is not what you asked, but I'm gonna add some other information to that. I also have similar orientations to subbing versus dubbing, but that's not the case everywhere. The citation, I'm not gonna flip all the way back here. There's a linguistic anthropologist called Perry Schurouse, although I actually don't know how to say his last name, but let's say it's Schurouse. And he works on media industries in Georgia, in the Republic of Georgia, and where they have a lot of Russian-produced media. And the way, especially young people, orient to dubbing versus subs there, absolute opposite. Subs suck, dubs rule. Because subs are really low quality, and dubbing is just, I don't remember all the details of that argumentation, right? But it's the Russian, it's not like major English language text, but there's a different set of associations going on there. So I don't think those forms of linguistic mediation are picked up in the same way in other contexts. Yes, Megan.
Is there any like sense of irony or like self-awareness in when they talk about their language policing basically?
Yeah.
And as a very much outsider, I'm like, that's very cheto. Like, I'm like, what are you doing? You sound like a crazy, like you sound like a rich kid right now.
It is very cheto, and they know that, and that's one of the reasons they, when I start to ask questions about like, what's your deal with English, they do all this other work to say like, well, yes, chetos are the ones that use English a lot, but I'm not. It's not me. Later in that conversation, in the clip I played with Pablo and Emilio, I can't remember which one of them says this, but one of them makes a really funny comment about like, chetos are the reason I'm afraid to say sorry in public anymore. because in addition to the what kind of cheto practice, there's also a little speech stereotype where instead of saying lo siento or disculpame, chetos will say sorry, I'm sorry.
So this is like phonetics of Spanish or something?
Yeah. So yes, I mean that's true, and they know there is a self-awareness about it. They'll know like, I had conversations where people will tell me like, we have to like watch what we do and when we do it. When we're chatting on Tumblr, when we're in these groups, well, Facebook is different. English is not as safe there, but on Tumblr, you would not assume they were Argentine unless you looked at their bios that say, I'm Pablo, I'm 23, and I'm from Argentina. So they know.
Well, it seems really salient with the dubbing versus subtitling. This is literally about socioeconomic status.
Yeah,
they're
definitely.
saying,
or they make it about it.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Yes, it is. Many of these things are, and they would probably say, somebody could read it like that, but we're not. We're not. That's an LA accent. I don't say sorry in public anymore. I'm just talking about shipping and ship posting, so sometimes that's licensed. Yeah. Yes, Maya?
I guess going off of that, I wonder if it goes sort of beyond the socioeconomic status to these kinds of like fields of indexicality of like preppiness, which I know is obviously correlated with socioeconomic status, but like so I wonder if there's this like visual signaling that also goes on. I don't know anything about chetos except that I saw like one of the like Argentinian soap operas of like rich kids, so I'm assuming they all
What did you
dress
watch?
preppy. I don't know, it was in Israel, I don't remember the name.
I'm curious. Find it later.
Yeah. But so I'm wondering if there's like also that kind of, visual signaling that comes with like clothing.
Dress?
stuff like that.
Yeah. You should watch that YouTube video, Como Ser Cheto. English is one part of it, but for my participants, that kept coming up any question about like do people like actually use English in their everyday life around here? Well, chetos do. Chetos. But there's also like aesthetic, like stylistic, how you dress. Chetos travel to Miami all the time. They drive fancy cars. They go to private schools.
So, but like, do the fans then like contrast their own like clothing?
Yes, for sure. Yeah. I mean, also, I lost the thread of what the also was going to be. Yes, they do. The answer is yes. Yeah, the fans in my study do not dress like chicos. All of the participants in my study are pretty like middle class. Some people have traveled abroad, but it was kind of like a special, like, one-time thing. Chetos go to Disneyland every other year. Excuse me, Disney World. Beg your pardon. Yeah, so there's other ways it can contrast in some Chetos besides speech. But there is a sense that, like, if I overdo the English in public orally, then I could get rid of the Cheto, and I don't want that.
Real quick.
Yes.
Is it as expensive to go to like a Comic-Con or whatever in Argentina as it is here?
The big national one, Argentina Comic-Con, is wildly expensive, and it is going up. It's very expensive. I mean, inflation is also out of control there, so that's also a problem. But there are also many smaller, I was at an event virtually every other weekend, if not every weekend. There are lots of smaller ones that have no entry fee or small ones. But the big iconic, like when you think Comic-Con convention, that's I can't remember how much I paid. It's wacky. And yeah, most of those events are also concentrated in Buenos Aires, but then again, like most of the population of the country is in Buenos Aires. But there are I didn't get a chance to go to any of these, but I also heard that there's kind of like a growing fan convention industry in some of the bigger interior cities. So there is still a sense that you have to go to the big city if you want to go to any of these events, but that's not entirely true anymore. Yeah, expensive, yes. AZC expensive. Other options that exist, less so. Yes.
Like the example of Paradis.
Mhm.
Do you see a pattern of Latinization or making it sound more Hispanic or romantic, rather than the English early pronunciation of English words?
Could you repeat that question? I don't think I got it.
So do you see a pattern where words that are in English are pronounced with a much more Spanish type accent to make it sound less Cheto?
Oh, cool question. I can't think of any data from like my in-person interviews. There are probably some cases in Facebook groups or on Tumblr where they'll play with the orthography a little bit. Probably. Don't know for sure. That's a good question, though. Thank you.
Shall we say thanks to Mary-Caitlyn?
Thank you, live stream. Thank you, everyone who tuned in. We're gonna hang up now. If you have questions, you can message me or email me. I don't know I can't see who's in the live stream right now. I think you probably all know how to contact me. Y si hay argentinos en el live stream que me quieren mandar un mensaje con preguntas, con dudas, aclaraciones, acá estoy. In a few hours, we'll know if I'm a doctor. Thank you all.
Spoiler alert, she is.
Don't jinx it.